So I'm Yael Grushka-Cockayne. I'm a faculty at Harvard Business School. It's nice to see some familiar faces. And I'm here not to talk about research, although I can spend a lot of time talking about that, but I'm specifically going to talk about teaching, teaching data science to managers, technical and non-technical folk. My experience is, as I'll show you in a moment, from teaching MBA students in the classroom, teaching non-MBA folks, teaching companies and doing workshops on data science and making sure that we can find ways to bridge the gap that the previous speaker alluded to between the technical folks in the organization, the data science folks in the organization, and the business units in the organization. So that's my vision. So that's the topic of the conversation. And as you'll quickly see, I'm a case method teacher, so I will try to involve you in the conversation to see if I can get some answers to propagate from the audience that is left to keep you guys, energized for the last session of the day, and to get you guys commenting back and forth with me so we can create something interesting going on before the reception. Okay? I got at least one thumbs up, so that's good. So a little bit about me. Professors at the business school, we do a few activities. Our main activities are around research and teaching. We also do curriculum development, which I'll show you in a moment some examples of. But my background is, I'm an industrial engineer, an operations researcher. You can call it in many different ways. And my background in terms of my research and my teaching has really been around activities related to decision analysis. These days, it's morphed into data science. And I have a leg in operations around topics of project management. And for me personally, what's nice today is that the world of data science kind of combines some of these skills of mine and my interests, because data science requires some coding, some statistics, some things that I can bring from my industrial engineering and my decision analysis background. But project management helps us deliver some of those innovations and make sure that the teams know how to run those projects to execution and to completion. And so that's where I sit in terms of my teaching and my research. And I've been doing this for over a decade now. I spent 9 years at the University of Virginia, the Darden School, and I've recently moved. Last year, I moved to Harvard Business School. The audience that I teach, again, the topics are listed there in the slides: data science, business analytics, digital strategy and innovation, decision analysis, project management. The audiences are typically folks with experience. So I work with either residential MBA students who come after 3 to 4 or 5 years of experience out, and they come back to school to do their graduate degree. I work with executive education audience. These are folks that are still working, and they come to do this either for a week or for a few days, or they're doing this in parallel to their work. I don't typically work with undergrads, so most of the folks that I interact with are folks that know something about how to run or the struggles of being in the business world. Okay, and so that's my background. Okay, and of course, feel free to stop me at any time if you have any questions. So I don't need to tell you. I think the folks in the room are aware of this, but the vision is that business leaders today really need to be data-driven. I'm going to highlight what's in red so you guys don't have to worry about seeing it too much. But business leaders, managers, leaders, folks who come from the business perspective really have to get a sense for what it means to be data-driven, because their organizations are being driven more and more by data. They need to understand and utilize advanced analytics to really get ahead of the competition, and they need to use that in their decision-making throughout. And again, I feel like I'm preaching to the choir, so hopefully you all agree that they need to do and to learn how to work in the cloud. Things are not necessarily operationalized locally, so they need to operate in the cloud. They need to think and to understand how algorithms work around them, and to understand some level of code. They might not need to code themselves, but they need to not be intimidated by the word code. And they need to be able to combine the human dimension, the individuals that are in their organization, their customers, with what the machines are recommending or are suggesting or are guiding. And so business leaders, this is very different from perhaps what business leaders were required to do 20, 30 years ago. I'm not the first to come up with this vision. Obviously, this is where we know the world is headed. But there aren't that many domains in which we train the business leaders to do all of this. And so part of my vision and my work today is to try and help create materials and help envision a classroom in which we can help the business leaders prepare to become those leaders of tomorrow. Okay? For instance, at Harvard Business School, if you go back to like the 90s, there were courses on quantitative methods and analytics, and then they were scrapped. They were taken out of the course, out of the core curriculum. They were taken out of the entire curriculum almost completely, to the point where some stats was being done up front as a prerequisite. Some people would do it, some people didn't, but then no analytics was actually covered during the 2 years of the program. And then students would depart and become leaders of organizations, and they never got that training. It could have been fine a few years ago. These days, that's not acceptable, and that's one of the things that myself and my colleagues are trying to change. Not only MBA students, but this is true also for executive education. If you guys work in companies that do training and send your employees to do executive or leadership, it's typically leadership training that you go to do, strategic training, maybe some operational training, but rarely is it investing in the leadership to go and learn how to do quants. That just doesn't happen as much. And again, that's something that I believe we need to bridge, and that's part of the effort that I'm part of. Okay, so my teaching objectives, broadly speaking, and this is across different populations, my teaching objectives are typically to build an understanding for how to use data, to appreciate the analytics, how to run the analytics in the organization, in a variety of different contexts. So it's across the different parts of the organization. I'm not just talking about analytics in one specific way. This is running analytics and running data science in the context of marketing, in the context of finance, in the context of processes and manufacturing. It could be in many different parts. It could be internally, a part of your talent management. Whatever the way that your organization is going to use analytics and data science, I want to help those leaders of tomorrow, the business leaders, understand and embrace that. I also want to help develop this appreciation for where the managers, where the business leader comes to play. What is their role in the process? So if we think about the data science process, from thinking about the problem, gathering some data, forming hypotheses, testing hypotheses, and implementing solutions, the leaders and the managers are part of that process, and they need to understand how they can contribute. How do they slot in? How do they interact with the more analytics team? How do they interact with their data scientists to progress things in the organization? And that's part of my teaching objectives, to understand the process. And to provide some practical experience. I want to push people to, yes, open some kind of notebook and code. I want to teach them that it's not that intimidating, that it's hard and you can become very good at it, and not everybody has to, but you can learn and bridge the gap by even a little bit of exposure. And so I include coding in my course. There is no Excel, it is purely code-based, and I make sure that it's for all audiences, the novices and those with some background. And the environment in which I teach, which I'll tell you about in a moment, helps me overcome any challenges that certain individuals have, or helps me capitalize on the breadth of experiences in the room. Okay? And so the final bullet point, again, you can't see it because of my color coding, is that my courses are intended for novices as well as experienced. I have no prerequisites, and I'm encouraging a diverse group of individuals to join the classroom. So let me tell you a word or two about the case method. So anybody here experience a classroom that taught with cases, with the case method? Okay, we have a handful. Fantastic. So there are a handful of schools, not many, just about the same number of hands that were raised here in the room, in the world that teach using the case method. And I mean not just using cases, but use the case method to its fullest. And I'm talking about a Socratic student-led environment. So using cases are stories, examples of specific organizations that have specific business problems. And a case is written about a specific company at a point in time. And the students are asked, what would you do? Okay, what is your recommendation? What course of action would you do? And Harvard Business School is the leader. They invented, or they were the first business school to kind of adopt this method. The Darden School, where I spent almost a decade, is the other. There's Ivy in Canada that teaches this way from Western Ontario. And then there's ES in Spain that teaches using this method. But aside from that, there are rarely other business schools who teach 100% case method, which means there's no lecturing. Okay, the fact that I have slides here is highly unusual for me. I walk into a classroom, you might see that I have chalk on me today because I just claimed from the class. It's all board driven through a conversation, and it is not something that we come in and talk to the students, but we ask the students questions and they teach each other. Okay? And so the example on the slide is just a few cases that I've written. Part of my job as a professor in Harvard Business School is to write cases. That's how, one of my objectives. And these cases are cases that we then use either with executive audiences or in the classroom. So now we come to data science or business analytics, and we say, okay, can we teach data science using cases? How do we do that? Well, I'm here to say I believe it's one of the best ways, if not the only way, to actually teach it, because you're walking in with a business problem. And of course, there's always going to be a data set and there's going to be an analysis, but it's related to a business problem, a company that cares about a specific problem that needs to use data science or analytics to solve. And we let the students hack at it, okay? And they're going to come into the classroom ready to embrace the conversation around what they think that company should do, what they think the protagonist is facing, why they care about this problem. Then we're going to talk a little bit about the analysis that they chose to do, and then we're going to come back and say, okay, what do you do with this in practice? What's the next step? How do you use these insights from your analysis to push things further? Okay? So let me ask you guys, in a very case method-y kind of way, why do you think some of us are fanatic case method institutions? What are the benefits for teaching this way? So one of the benefits is because it's a conversation, instead of benefiting just from my perspective, they hear 60, 70, 90 other perspectives in the room, and so they can get gain from others' experience. Good. Other reasons why we might use the case method. Do we have another mic? Just so you're not running back and forth.
Brainstorming, and also at the same time it just simulated the real business occasions, and just because in the real business world, also a bunch of people from different departments discuss the solutions and also problems.
I would hope so, right? So in the real world, there is no professor down the hall in Wayfair walking in and saying, oh, here's my lecture for how you should solve your problem today. This is the point in time where you need to do neural nets. Like, nobody's telling that to the data scientists here. They have to figure it out themselves. This is an environment we're trying to simulate what companies do by having people figure out a solution to their current problem and improvise to some degree. And that relates to another point, that there really isn't a right or wrong. Okay? There's going to be many different ways to tackle a problem. There's going to be some maybe obvious mistakes that we want to avoid. But there are a lot of correct or pretty good approaches to solving a business problem. And that's all welcomed in the classroom. Okay? Any other ideas on why we teach using the case method? Just throw it out. Why do you think? What are some benefits from using cases in a discussion and not lecture-based using slides? I'll tell you what, it's definitely, the downside is that it's very slow. Okay, I know an answer. I could have just told them very quickly. Instead, I have to wait for them to discover it themselves. Sometimes it's very painful. Okay, so why do I do it?
I think sometimes, the case is really good and it's a real life case. I think that brings a lot of value. Sometimes the case quality is, and I'm sure you're choosing the case quality based on what you're trying to portray. So I think if it's purposeful from that perspective, then you get a very diverse solution that someone may not have thought about it before.
Beautiful. And so if I were to ask you all, how many of you remember a specific slide deck from a specific class at the university that you may have sat through, I'm seeing already some smiles because I suspect you don't remember much, okay? Maybe you remember how you distracted yourself to stay awake during that time, but you won't remember as much those equations on a slide deck. If you're talking about a company like Wayfair, there's plenty of cases on Wayfair. If you're talking about a company like today I taught an IDEO case, IKEA last week. If you talk about a company or Amazon that has a real problem that you think is very challenging, and then we discover together how to overcome it, then you remember it. It's memorable, and you will then use those memories more readily. Okay? Life is messy, case studies are messy. We want deeper understanding of concepts. We want better retention of learning, and only by trying and doing and hacking away at it with each other will people actually internalize and learn. Not if I tell them the solution, but if they discover it themselves. We want people to have a safe space to test ideas and to practice that brainstorming kind of concept. Get in a room, get with a board, hack out solutions, and practice that communication skill. And we want folks to feel like they can persuade each other. They can stand true to their perspective, and they can argue their perspective and argue and counter-argue other folks' perspective. And that's what we're trying to build with the case method. And data science is no different. So teaching data science to managers, I believe, has a lot of very similar kind of necessities. And so that's why I think this is especially a good method for teaching the types of tools that I'm trying to teach the folks in my classroom. I'll go through this quickly, but some things to think about that are interesting with the case method is that they encourage what we call the 4 Ps. There are 5 Ps, 6 Ps. It's a bit of a cliche, but the idea is that by doing the case method and by teaching it in a very interactive way, we get people to be prepared. They have to work hard in advance of class. They're not showing up in blank. They have to read the case, run the code, and come prepared to talk about what the code did the night before. We have students participate, so they come ready to contribute. I can cold call them like I did here today. They listen and they comment. There's one conversation. I know some of you are doing other activities, but if I started to cold call more folks in the room, I bet you would stop doing whatever other activities you're doing. And so that means that focus is on one conversation, contributing to that conversation, and listening to each other and progressing the conversation. And folks are very proactive and not passive. We have presence, so that's my single conversation, and we have a professionalism, an ability to debate and argue, and walk people through your analysis in a way that is very hard to do in a lecture-based environment. Think about how many times you've been in a room with either a business representative and a coder, and the combination of like a data scientist and the business function, and they're trying to communicate with each other. The business person is trying to ask questions about the coder is trying to explain the code, and nobody's getting anywhere. That requires some practice. It requires skill. It requires explaining variables and functions and what goes in and what goes out of a function. It requires not using shortcuts with your keyboard, but using the mouse so people can see where you're going on your screen. Those are little things that folks trip upon if they don't practice it. If I don't practice, then I rush through my code as if it's obvious, and I don't think about who I'm trying to communicate to. And our case method environment really encourages more attention to how you interact and how you ask the questions and how you answer those questions related to technical necessities like data science. Okay, so in my class, and I'm describing here in this slide a very general classroom experience. I've done this for MBAs, as I've mentioned. I've done this for executives from companies that have come and wanted a day or two on this. And I've done this for other types of groups that are a combination of some technical but mostly non-technical people. Students work on virtual machines. Thank you, Domino. I send all my students, because I don't want to worry about local installations and different types of machines, and I don't want to overwhelm students with the need to do too much locally. We use Domino as an entry point, and it's almost become like our learning management system where the students log on to Domino, they get their assignment, they read the case, and they launch their Python or their R Jupyter notebook from within Domino, and then they can run their code. Okay? So they're learning to work in the cloud. They're exposed to that environment. They're working with some starter code that we provide them that gives them some kind of basic first steps on the analysis. And even if they do nothing else but run that starter code, they will get some insight into the problem. If they have time and if they feel up to it, and of course the better students eventually do, they start repurposing the code and pushing the needle on that code. We include Tableau, SQL. We use Zoom, and my IT folks here The data science people at Harvard hopefully are supportive, but we use Zoom to share screens. So again, I'm not lecturing, but I want them to talk to each other. And I want to distill this idea of a coding dojo, meaning like a central activity, some people coding and everybody else watching, like you would like a taekwondo match, okay? So what we have is the ability to share. One of the students has their laptop open. They share their screen using Zoom or any other sharing technology that you have, and they're the driver in that session. And following the conversation, they can edit the code, they can manipulate the code, they can run the code, or we kind of ping to somebody else who then becomes in the dojo and somebody else takes the leadership role. So we're kind of playing with that idea of presenting and being vulnerable and realizing that it's not a static analysis, but this is a dynamic thing that we progress together, and that the conversation in the room with the breadth of experiences creates this newly found insight that we never would have gotten to on our own. So this is an example of a course that I'm launching in the spring. I already have 90 students registered, and this is the screenshot from Domino. I just want to be respectful of our time. And so you see here that my students have 40% of their grade based on the quality of the conversation in the classroom, 20% based on some analysis that they do on their own, and then 40% based on group projects to develop those group skills of delivering a product at the end of the course. Okay? I'll skip that. That was an outline, and this is an example of a our Jupyter notebook that we have them walk through, well documented, of course, but they basically have to run this before the class so they can come prepared to discuss the analysis. Okay? Before I move into another example of a program that I wanted to share with you, I wanted to pause here and see if you guys had any questions or thoughts based on what I've presented so far. Thoughts, questions, concerns? Do you think it would work, not work? Yes, go ahead.
How can you do this with your manager?
How can you do this with a manager? Meaning, how can
I adopt this approach? How can I use this thing to teach my manager?
So one thing, so I think there's a few answers to that, okay? First, we want to encourage managers and make this material more approachable. So the first idea is to say, I want to get together in a room and work on a problem together, okay, brainstorm together, as opposed to working individually and on our own, okay? You want to tell your manager that there are real benefits for the manager getting some exposure, and for you listening to the manager, and vice versa. In that exchange, you're going to get and develop new insight that you wouldn't have done before that, okay? We offer executive formats courses. So there's courses that you can send your manager to be surrounded with other managers from different companies that will also expose him to some of these ideas, okay? I'm not totally, you'll see now I'm going to present a hybrid model that is online and in person. I think whatever training people do needs to have an in-person live session with a facilitator that can help go through this type of analysis. So companies that want to get kind of up to speed or try and implement some of these ideas might have a professor like myself come in and facilitate maybe a day or two of 4 case discussions. Let's even 3 or 4 examples of case discussions and show you how it's done, meaning what kind of questions we ask, what do we put on the board, what progress do we make as a group. And then when I walk away, go back to my office, you will be encouraged to try and practice those ideas together as an organization. So you can organize like a day of like a cross-training experience where you read and train and practice it with like 3 or 4 of the cases that I could give you a list of, okay? So this is something that you can even have a taster of in like a short amount of time and benefit from it longer term, okay? And I'm doing that, I'm doing a half a day with Daimler. I did a half a day with AB InBev. Like companies come and do, and they bring a mixture of individuals from their organization, some people that are technical, but a lot that are not, and together they go through a mini version of what I just presented. So the question was, should it be done by an outsider? I don't think it has to be done by an outsider, but I think that there are some benefits because it feels like we're impartial, or it feels like we're outsiders that can push some of the needles a little bit and kind of push you guys to talk across the organization in ways that you might not otherwise do. But it doesn't require huge amounts of intervention. Like one day is probably sufficient to make a significant difference. That's my experience, at least. And I've been doing this for quite a long time. Okay, here's another example of how we teach non-technical folks the technical content. So I am involved in a program at Harvard called the Harvard Business Analytics Program. This is a cross-university. It involves 3 of Harvard colleges and schools. So it's the business school, it's the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences, and it's the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And the combined efforts across Harvard University offer this certificate. It's a business analytics certificate that is done primarily online, but there are once a week synchronous live case discussions, so it still uses the case method, and there's in-person immersions. And the students go through a breadth of courses over a 9-month period, and these courses are pretty technical, using exactly the tools that I described previously. Working in the cloud, using R, using Python, and using a heavy reliance on case method to collaborate. What this program does that I think is important is that it creates, and this maybe links to the previous talk, and I'll try to conclude there, but these programs create a vibrant community of folks that are non-technical, that want to be able to communicate better with the technical side of things. And we do it through a mixture of activities that the schools and the program fosters, like we enable, and we have all of our communication online through Slack, and we encourage them to share and be very open in their sharing approach and learn from each other. But the students also self-organize and create their own community through LinkedIn and through other tools that we're familiar with. And so this has been a transformational experience for me to be part of, but it's also been a transformational experience for the students who now find themselves able to have a much more technical dialogue in their organizations because we've helped them kind of bridge that gap. And so the impact that I'm seeing, and this is, again, from reflections from my alums, many of which I might meet here at Wayfair after this talk, but this is reflections from folks who go out to work and they send me their feedback and their reaction. So the top one is probably some empathy between, as a business leader, you want to understand more what goes into the data science work. And so building that empathy and building that kind of capability to look each other in the eye and to have more of a shared understanding for, yeah, we can't just think of the next product and assume that the data gets collected and it's clean and it's perfect and everything works. We need to understand some of the struggles. That's the first thing that the students realize. And if nothing else, by trying to do a group project among 4 or 5 of them with very, problematic data often, they realize that they hit those roadblocks very quickly. The second goal and the second impact that I've been noticing is that even folks in my class who have background, and there are some folks who have like CS background or worked in the Silicon Valley for years, they really report huge amount of growth in the need to talk to those folks with no background. So it helps them recognize that world of non-technical people in their organization that they didn't maybe think about as much or worry about communicating with. This pushes them to communicate with those folks. And so most of the project teams that I have are mixed, some people with background, some people without. And this course really helps them push the needle on what they can do as technical people in communicating with the others that don't have the background. The third impact is that we have more diverse cross-disciplinary teams. Many more of my students feel confident after this to walk into a company that is technically oriented and feel that they can contribute. They also feel that they can, it breaks some boundaries in terms of gender and representation, the backgrounds, the geographical backgrounds that they come from, any kind of other barriers get, it's not broken completely, but we improve and we push the needle on that by exposing non-technical people to the technical world. And of course, we improve the accountability and decision-making because ultimately, at every single class, we ask people to make a recommendation and we ask them to defend their recommendation relying on the data. And I'll pause there. I know that the reception is about to kick off, so thank you for sticking around until 5:20, although it feels like 8 o'clock in the evening outside. I enjoyed talking to you all, and I'll hang around for a few more minutes. Thank you for inviting me.